to honor those who have shown up on time and early as well. We really appreciate your being here. We are excited to bring this webinar to you, this panel discussion on staying true, navigating change while upholding core values. It's a really important topic, especially right now. We are, struggling with a lot of different things out there. There's a very big change environment. There are a lot of things that are hitting people in many different directions. Change is not new. It's one of the only constants, as people like to say, but it's how you handle it and how you handle it in today's environment with yourself, with your teams, and with your organization. So we have a really great panel discussion today set up for you. My name is Gordon Loeb. I am the president of Loeb Leadership. We are a leadership and management consultancy where we focus on executive coaching, training and development, and organizational consulting. I'd like to just introduce my esteemed panel, just have them say something about themselves so people know who will be responding today. David Sarnoff, can you tell us a little about yourself?
Sure, Gordon. I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. I'm David Sarnoff. I'm a certified executive coach, leadership trainer, and I'm the director of strategic partnerships with Loeb Leadership. Started my career in law as a paralegal, spent 9 years at a firm in New York up into being a mid-level litigation associate. Spent 17 years in executive search, coaching and consulting companies, law firms, attorneys, and for the past 8 years have been doing executive coaching and leadership training. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Tamara.
Thanks, Gordon. Hi, everybody. My name is Tamara Fox. I'm a national board certified health and wellness coach. So I'm the group wellness nerd. I am the head of client experience with Loeb Leadership, and my background is in human resources consulting, everything from mergers and acquisitions to leadership development to training to overseeing HR operational teams, and excited to be here today.
Thank you very much, Tamara. Natalie.
Sure. I am the proud founder of Loeb Leadership and the co-CEO. This business started 27 years ago as a way, as I always say, work life, what was then the term used, balance, for me to be able to continue a career and do something that I absolutely love, as well as be a mom, a value that I think you'll see we'll be talking about a little bit later. Prior to starting the business, I spent 10 years in-house at a very large, now global law firm. I loved it, part of the HR team, and did my graduate work in what's known as industrial organizational psychology. I've always been fascinated about how you work with people in large businesses doing interesting work, help them to perform at their best. I'm also a leadership coach. I've also done training and facilitation and some consulting work. And today my role is really to help lead the business. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. And I love this topic. Seen lots of change. And like Gordon mentioned earlier, change is constant. And how we respond and react and navigate to it as human beings is something I think we should always step out and reflect on. And I think that's what today is a bit about. We put this team together to talk about it. I'm also the happy wife of Gordon Loeb as we've built this business together. So yeah, lots of change there too. And 36 years in a week. Next week, it'll be 36 years.
Happy anniversary. So thank you very much for the panel.
We got a heart there, Gordon. We got a heart.
Oh, very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Somebody, we're getting more hearts.
Yeah,
well, no, 36 years is an accomplishment.
We also have Logan and David Robert helping us in the background, so we appreciate their help as well. So let's start a little bit with, in leadership, it's we often hear about the balance between emotional intelligence and IQ, so EQ versus IQ. David Sarnoff, from your experience, how does emotional intelligence really influence leadership decisions, especially in maintaining civility and clarity under pressure?
Well, thanks for that, Gordon. For me, we work with a lot of clients in industries and professions like the law, like sciences, engineering, significant focus on IQ. That's the price of admission, to be able to solve high-level problems and carry out tasks and practices and skills. However, what the research shows is that in order to be an effective leader and manager of others, it requires a high level of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is a very large topic. For purposes of today, let's view EQ, emotional intelligence, interchangeable. that it's having the self-awareness to understand how you show up, how you're perceived by your teams, and the impact of your words and actions on others. And it couldn't have been better timing for this webinar. That a couple weeks ago, Bloomberg published an article about how leaders with high empathy significantly outperformed the leaders of companies who had high empathy. Their companies significantly outperformed companies with leaders with low empathy. And the case study that the article talks about is KKR, legendary private equity firm. And several years ago, as KKR was acquiring companies, they were giving equity stakes to employees to incentivize them and motivate them to perform at a high level. And as they continued to do this process, they just assumed that everybody would perform at a high level. And when they started to dig in and analyze it, they saw that wasn't the case. So they actually connected to a Stanford professor named Jamil Zaki, and they did a study, and they found that the companies they acquired where they gave equity compensation, if the leaders of those companies scored high on empathy, those companies significantly outperformed other companies in the KKR portfolio. So as I posted on LinkedIn, this isn't Sesame Street saying empathy is highly valued. This is KKR, okay? $600 billion in assets. So when I get pushback from leaders, care, empathy, it's soft. I have KKR now to say, no, it's not. And leaders who are high in empathy aren't coddling their teams, okay? They use empathy to connect to other people's circumstances and understand what motivates and inspires them to hold people accountable, be able to give direct and impactful feedback, understand what could be impairing performance and how to course correct. It also allows teams, leadership teams, as well as stakeholders to cultivate and build high trust work environments. So problems and solutions are identified at a much earlier stage than when there's low trust, low empathy, and we discover there's a problem when there's an absolute crisis. So it's actually empathy in that case is used also as a strategic tool, but you can't fake it. People will know immediately. So in short, Gordon, the answer to your question is, as to quote Daniel Goleman, in a room of very intelligent people, emotional intelligence is the distinguishing characteristic as to who among them will be most able to lead.
Appreciate that insight into that. And I'm going to do a quick follow-up question to Natalie. In those high pressure, uncertain moments, how do you stay grounded in keeping your values in sight?
So it's interesting, as I heard you speak, David, and I love how you talked about that and talked about that recent research. It's funny, I mentioned that I worked for this law firm over 27 years ago. It was 10 years at that firm. And as I was studying the work in the IO field, we were learning about exactly what you were just saying then. And I remember bringing that into the work that I was doing. And let me tell you, it wasn't widely received in a positive way or accepted. I remember people sitting like this in workshops and, I don't know about this. And I often felt like a salmon swimming upstream or pushing a bowling ball uphill, trying to help people understand the value of what empathy, like how that helped to build team cohesion. It was fascinating. And I will say now, 27 years later, and with generational shifts, you are certainly seeing, I don't say the opposite, but people widely trying to understand what emotional intelligence is. How do I use it? What does my empathy look like? And as we know through the research in emotional intelligence, that empathy actually can develop. We can learn behaviors if we choose to help us show that we want to connect with others. So that's the magic, right, in that research and what we're seeing happen. So now, Gordon, you asked a little bit about values, and I think I was thinking about it this way and how this helps us during times of turbulence. Empathy, like David said, helps us to connect to others. Values, individual values, helps us to connect to ourselves. And so another piece of this work, and I've seen over the years, and boy, it's kind of it's a little embarrassing to admit, but I've been doing this work almost 40 years now. Well, 35, I guess. And I realize values, the talk about what are my values as a person, what are my values as a leader, which is where a lot of the work for me professionally has come in. And why does that matter? And how does that impact me as a leader is something I have been using and thinking about and trying to practice myself my entire career. So what I will tell you where I am now, post 60, right? And having gone through many transitions myself in my life, I had the privilege of identifying my values in a workshop when I was 34, while I was a young mother. And during that workshop, it made me look at what are my highest values? What's most important to me? What do I want to, how do I want to live my life so that when I get to the end, and they always say on that tombstone, it's very rarely most beloved office worker or whatever it may, it's like, who are you? When you get a chance to identify what your personal values are and think about them, and by the way, they can change a little bit during a transition in life, and that is true. You get a chance then to start thinking about how you're acting and how your actions may or may not align with your values as you go throughout your days, your life, your career. And those values will help you make choices in an easier way. So you're staying aligned with what's important to you. And this gets really tricky throughout our lives. But I will say, like I said, I did my first identification of values at the age of 34. And I will tell you at that time, my number one was family and mother, which had something to do with how this whole business emerged. And then I sort of took another look and I said, if I were doing my values exercise today, and I've done them a number of times in my life, because I believe this is something every leader should step out and think about at some point in their points in their careers for sure. And I thought, okay, what would be my top five values if you asked me today? And I'm going to give you a quick example, and then I know I'll wrap it into another question to ask. But right now, my number one guiding value, no doubt, is health. And some of you even may know, I just came through a recent cancer scare. Health was always important to me, but right now it is number one. Does that influence how I lead my life and my business today? Absolutely. Family is still number one, a top value. Achievement and success is a very top value for me right now. Inclusion is a very important value for me, and courage is a very important value for me. I thought about these this morning, and I think even having this webinar, I'm so glad I went back and I thought about it. And those are what I go to as I am sort of thrown all different types of things day to day today and think about, this has always been important to me. What am I doing today that will align with this? How do I do that? And it anchors me. So I'll just say that this is how I feel like when we're clear, when there's clarity about what your values are, it will help you make decisions day to day on how to perform. The other thing about values that we know is that they're tied to credibility with leaders. So leaders that align their actions with their values have higher credibility. People around you can sniff it out and notice it. And there's a much higher chance that they will support you, be committed, and people will follow you. So this values piece is just so important. And over the years, I have seen it. Over the years, I've seen leaders that gain clarity on their values. I see leaders that choose not to, and it gets really muddy. And I've seen how others respond to them and what they can get accomplished.
I appreciate that, Natalie. That's great insight. And we do a lot of work with the Leadership Challenge by Kouzes and Posner. And one of their practices is modeling the way. And in order to model the way effectively and be a strong leader and have that credibility and authenticity is to really, as you said, align your actions with your values. But first, you have to understand what your values are. So if you haven't done a values exercise, please, you can Google it. There are a lot of other ways of doing it. We can help you with that as well. But it's really an important thing to do it, not just once, but every now and then, especially if they're new qualifying life events. There's a big disconnect sometimes when you understand what your core values are, and they might be differing from your organization's values. And we're going to touch on that in a little bit. How do we work with that kind of a gap? But what I'd like to really just talk to a little bit is about assessments. Have you found any assessments that leaders can enhance their self-awareness with, like a EQI or a DISC or a CSI? Anyone want to take that one?
I'll just mention real quick and I'll pass it that I think that in terms of the values, self-awareness is always so important. So we're always, any assessment, we're believers in assessments. We like them. They can help trigger people's thoughts and have them step back and reflect. That is going to help them clarify either about themselves or their values is going to be helpful. Dave, I think you're about to say something. I'm sorry if I interrupted
Yeah,
you.
no worries. So with one assessment that I like using, especially with my clients who are senior leaders, is the EQI 2.0 assessment that measures emotional intelligence. And it's based on 15 subscales, and they include things like self-regard, how you view yourself, how much respect you have for yourself, impulse control, stress management, optimism, empathy, flexibility, problem solving, all these things that use emotion. And to Natalie's earlier point, these are learned behaviors. Okay, so the more you do them and practice, the greater skill you'll have as you get more experience. So taking your EQ assessment one day and taking it 5 years later, there may be a noticeable change in the score as opposed to your IQ assessment, which you can take multiple times and it'll change within a very tight range. And so when I use the EQI with clients, it raises a level of self-awareness to identify areas to dig deeper and have further dialogue and conversation. For me, these assessments are data points. They're opportunities to create a space for dialogue. I don't overweight them. I don't believe they define who you are or are incredibly predictive. But with respect to assessments, the EQI is one that I use often. Tamara, how about you?
Yeah, well, to add to what both of you said, Natalie, you said we're a fan of assessments. I always joke I'm an assessment geek because I love them. And your question was, Gordon, though, like increase or enhance our self-awareness. And all of the different assessments that we at least work with at Loeb Leadership are scientifically valid and credible. So in different regards, they do increase our self-awareness. It depends on the overall goal you're looking for. The one David's referring to, the EQI, the emotional quotient, is great, especially for leaders, because as Natalie shared before, you can develop your emotional intelligence if you have that growth mindset and are wanting and willing to. Other assessments, though, like DISC or the change style indicator, which is the CSI that you mentioned, Gordon, even situational leadership, all of the other assessments we work with, LPI, they all give you different lenses, as David shared, into who you are as a leader and an individual. Even if you're not a leader too, some of these are great for teams to better communicate together, collaborate, work together. They show you who you are, which is probably why we like them so much in different ways, because they are scientifically valid and credible. But the questions are, of course, different. The outcomes are different. It's all based on your overall goal, but you can get different types of self-awareness from each of them.
Thank you all for that input. Tamara, I'm going to follow up with a question to you. So during change, teams can really carry a lot of invisible weight, if you will. What are some of the indicators that leaders can watch out for that might signal that there is some emotional strain within the team and even themselves?
Sure. So one term, I don't know who was the first to tell me this, but one term I heard years ago was calling it an emotional undercurrent of a team, where there's a storm on the surface, but you don't see the people that are getting pulled under or who are experiencing that emotional piece because you don't know what's going on. There's two different buckets that I see that you can experience those indicators. The first are on the more tactical level, maybe, or performance level. So the more job specific absences, less responsive to teams, email, phone calls, clients, whatever that may be. All of a sudden, never turning their camera on. If you're a hybrid or remote team, never turning their camera on when they used to. Being late constantly. So those more like their performance starting to slip. They're missing deadlines, things that this individual has never done for their length of their tenure at your organization. So that's the more tactical or like job specific pieces I see. The other ones are on the more personal level, which I think leaders have a tendency to brush off because we sometimes don't want to ask people or name that we're noticing differences about them. So one of those is often somebody who used to joke often in meetings or have a good sense of humor, all of a sudden they stop joking. Or they once had they were the most bubbly person in the room, super talkative, super engaging. All of a sudden they're no longer talkative. So it's these more personal signs, which you really have to pay attention to because it can't just be once. Like if Natalie one day showed up and wasn't talkative, because Natalie and I are both very extroverted and talkative, I would say, okay, brush it off. Natalie's just having an off day. That's okay. I give her grace to be herself. But if every time I hopped on a call with Natalie, she wasn't engaging, she wasn't talkative, I would then have to recognize that pattern, that something has changed in Natalie. And if she were my teammate, no matter if you're the leader or not, if she's on my team, I would ask her something. Hey, Natalie, you can say it in a kind way. Natalie, I've noticed that there's been some changes in how you show up to our calls together. You once loved to engage in conversation, but I've noticed you haven't wanted to engage in conversation. I just want to check in and see how you're doing. Or is there anything you want to share with me? Creating the space for somebody to share what's going on. But again, also giving them a little bit of time to see, is it a quick one day issue or is it over time? So again, those more personal behavioral side is much more difficult for leaders. I say if I'm the type of person, I write everything down because I will forget. So if I notice things different and off with my team, I'll write it down to see, is it a pattern or is it just one day? And then check in with them, give them the space to share if there is something going wrong. Now, before you can even do that, though, you have to have already built a personal relationship with your teammate or individual, because if you've never built a relationship on a more personal level with them and you only ever talk about work and you randomly approach them, asking them if they're okay, because you've seen subtle shifts in their behavior, you're going to scare them. So back to David and Natalie's pieces around emotional intelligence, you first have to utilize that emotional intelligence, build that relationship. And then once you've built that relationship, then it is appropriate to ask questions to check in and see how they're doing.
Thank you for that, Tamara. Oh, sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, if I could just build off of that, because I once interviewed an executive in the media business, and this leader said that he got to know every member of his team. He knew what their hobbies were, what the names of their kids were, what kind of pets they had. And he said this created the level of trust where if they had an issue or a struggle, they would come to him directly. And he was able to then address it as opposed to, like I said earlier, get involved further down the path where it could be much more difficult to resolve. And he said, look, most people in their professional life are derailed from personal issues. It could be mental health, depression, substance abuse. They could be going through a divorce. They could be caring for a relative. And all those things, as Tamara outlined, can impact how they show up at work. And if there's high trust between that person and their leader, they're much more likely to engage and discuss it. So there can be some resolution put into place.
And also to that too, and then I want to answer the question that we got from one of our attendees. To that too, David, you bring up a great point that the leader also, to what Gordon said, you have to model the way. The leader has to model that they're also willing to share when their life is not, sunshine and rainbows. So Natalie shared that she dealt with health experiences. So that makes me feel more comfortable sharing with her what I'm going through health items. I've openly shared with my team the grief that I've experienced. So when my team's dealing with more difficult things, whether they be grief or something like a personal life experience, it's not as uncomfortable often because they've seen that leader model to them that it's okay to share that things are going on and that you may not be your best self. We got a question from one of the attendees asking, what do I do with a personal situation disclosed to me? So the HR professional in me would say, if it is related to health or like anything ADA, FMLA, where a law will kick in, talk to your HR team, because there may be something you need to do from a policies perspective that we can't give you guidance on because I don't know your policies. So if it is something around that, I would definitely consult your HR team. If it's more along the lines of somebody says, listen, I am dealing with a divorce right now and I'm just going through a very difficult time, so I need a little bit more patience and grace as I navigate this new situation. One, you can also ask them the question too, would you like me to share this information with anybody else, or would you like me to keep this confidential between you and I? You can ask them the questions. How can I support you during this time? What do you need from me as your leader or colleague in order to support you during this time? So what do you need from the company in order to be best supported during this time? You can ask them those how and what questions to enable them to share with you what they want. But if it's not something that needs to be reported to HR or shared with HR, then it would be something I would ask them how they want you to handle that information, because everybody's different. Some of your team members will want you to tell their colleagues, hey, this colleague is dealing with a difficult situation right now. Please be patient with them. Other team members will want you to say nothing at all. So that's where you have to engage in that vulnerable, trusted conversation with them so that they can guide you for what to do with the information.
And Tamara, oh, go ahead, Natalie.
Is this another piece, and I know you want to move on to another question, but another piece I'd like to add here, it's interesting, is when Tamara talked about the undercurrent on a team and things to look for. Many times with our clients, and particularly a lot of folks that I work with at all levels, but particularly senior levels, there's a lot of what I call high achievers on the teams, and high achievers don't complain or often they just want to work, they just do their work, and they grind it out, right? And it's very interesting as a leader, again, particularly with all the turbulence and the change and the things that we're all handling today. I think it's really important that we look for, or we remind our folks, sort of what Tamara was saying, that it's okay for them to step out and take a moment and take a breath too. Because again, we have to take care of ourselves to be able to take care of others. And I can't think of a time more in history where I think that is the case at this moment. Yesterday, and I was at a meeting with a bunch of high achievers, and it was funny. I was just sharing about how a CEO that I coach, and when I coach him, he's here in New York, he actually likes to walk in Central Park, and we do a walk and talk. And two leaders came up to me later and said, wow, I never really thought about that. And the leader of the team was there, and he gave permission, like, of course you can do that. Here in New York, just take a walk around the block if you can get a walk in and see some fresh air, get some fresh air, and then have a conversation. And if that's going to help you sort of decompress a little bit, do it. And they loved that idea. So we have to be thinking about and mindful of taking care of ourselves in the high pressure situations we're in. And sometimes, and I use the word step back, just take a breath, but whatever that, use that as a metaphor. So we can do that. And I do find often high achievers that just, again, just keep going and keep going. We know that that's not sustainable. It will lead to burnout. It's not good for the individual, for the team, for the organization. And we have to be really keeping our eye on that today. But it starts with us, right? So it's all connected. I always start with you place, right? Our values, how we want to work, how we want to live, and making sure we're staying true to that so we can navigate everything that's around us. And I'll just say, we recognize everybody's values are different. It's around what yours are and what they are for you and how you stay true to those to navigate. You'll see how it works.
David, did you have anything?
Just wanted to add, and I believe Tamara and Natalie just gave great advice, but I just wanted to piggyback on something Tamara said about having those confidential conversations with employees, and this is the litigator in me and the privilege and confidentiality. Once you commit to keeping a communication confidential, I highly recommend you never violate that. Cultivating trust and relationships takes time, effort. It can be difficult. It could be time consuming, but it is incredibly easy to impair that trust. And we have a colleague who says every human interaction either increases trust or diminishes trust. Like, we can't think of a trust neutral interaction. So whenever you have these conversations, am I increasing trust? Am I diminishing trust? Because once you breach somebody's confidence, it's very hard to get them to trust you again. So I think sometimes people say, well, that wasn't really such a big deal, so I could share it. Again, if it was under the umbrella of confidence, I would never disclose something without that person's permission.
And on the flip side to that, David, if you don't know if you can keep it confidential, like when it comes to things that are governed by the law on that HR side, do not guarantee to somebody that you don't have to talk to somebody else within your organization or firm. So you can say, let me find out, let me say I need to talk to HR, but that's all I will share with for now. But I do have to like share this. So if you can't keep it confidential, make sure you say that so that they're aware.
Those are all great points. And the reality is, when people are under stress and having some challenges, especially when they might have joined an organization because of a value synergy, and then all of a sudden in a different environment, the organization is going in a different direction and it's harder to reconcile. Natalie, I'm going to throw this one at you. What coaching or development initiatives have you seen make the biggest impact when a team is navigating change and challenges that might be also a values disconnect?
Okay. So I see sort of two questions in there. I see one about if your values are not in sync necessarily with the organization's values. And that's very common, always has been. And then, of course, organizations can change and their values can change, right? So you can end up maybe have been in an organization where your values were in sync and now things have changed and now they're not in sync. So this is what I go back to with that. And again, and there is research to support this, and this comes out of Koussis and Posner's research, which again, from that leadership challenge work that we do. So over and over, I've seen this happen. What they find in that research is like, ideally, it's, I guess, more pleasant or easy to work within an organization where you're aligned with similar values, right? And the organization actually walks the talk of the values as is similar to yours. That's the easiest. That feels good, and most engagement happens. However, if your values are not aligned, the research does show that what really matters is that the leader has personal clarity of their own values. And when your personal clarity is clear and you choose to stay where you are, you can lead in a way that's true to yourself, and you can do it and influence others lead others, right? And usually influence that often influences them. When you're credible, they will still follow you no matter where the goals are of the organization and where you need to go. And actually, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I remember it was a very small difference around engagement of the people around you when it was you were aligned with the organization's values, and even if you weren't. But as long as your personal values were clear, the number was still pretty high that you could get people to move along with you and you can reach the organization's goals. So the clarity of your own values is so important. Ultimately, if somebody feels as though this is not the right place for me because things are very different, that's always a personal choice that we always get to make, right? And those are tough choices, which leads into the part of your second question around coaching. So how does coaching help, and what does coaching do during times of change? So I have found that coaching provides that space for leaders right now to reflect and discuss on some of the things that we're talking about here. And again, I would say it's all about clarity, giving them that space to gain clarity, to be able to perform at their best during challenging, difficult times. I also find it gives them that space where they can think about how to take care of themselves in the way that will work for them so that they can, again, be at their best and take care of others. That's what I think is a leader's responsibility, take care of themselves to be able to take care of others. Very often and I would say over the past 6 to 8, 12 months, with a lot of the leaders I've been working with, there's been a lot of conversation around the why. Why are you there? Why are you doing what you do? The whole big why. And it drills down, and as they think about that why I get up every day and do what I do, they gain clarity, again, about how they're going to perform their work in the way they want to, or how they're going to treat others in order to be able to reach the goals that the organization has for them. Or sometimes they'll say, maybe this is the why means I need to choose a different path or start thinking about something else. And that is the power that coaching does today during these turbulent times.
Thank you for that, Natalie. Also, just a reminder, you can put questions in the Q&A section. We will try and answer them as we go through. We'll also have a little bit of a Q&A opportunity towards the end of this webinar. Tamara, this one's for you. How do you build a culture where well-being isn't just considered a perk, but it's actually a fundamental part of the organization, the firm or organization?
Yeah, so that comes down to it not being like a massage chair or somebody coming for massages or yoga on Wednesdays. That comes to it being part of the strategy of how leaders lead and how the organization or firm operates. And often when I meet with organizations and we talk about wellness or well-being, and I ask, well, how is wellness part of your culture or part of your strategy? They look at me like I have three heads, and they're like, what? What do you mean? Part of, like, we just we have wellness, we care about wellness. And I ask how. And I typically get those responses that I just said. Well, we offer great benefits, or we have a work from home policy, or we have, yoga classes, we have a massage therapist come on site. I get so many more of these tactical pieces, not the how the organization functions or firm functions and how teams can operate. So that has to be more of what are leaders doing consistently within an organization or firm to lead that creates space for wellness and well-being, because it looks different for everyone. If you create prescriptions around what wellness and well-being is for your firm or organization, you're going to lose a certain percent of your population. What I mean by that is if you were to say, okay, we offer yoga on Wednesdays in the break room, everybody's welcome to join. Anybody who doesn't like yoga is not being impacted by that wellness initiative. You're missing a percentage of your population. Versus if you have leaders who say to their teams, create the schedules that you need in order to go to doctor's appointments, pick your kids up from school. Of course, I know this isn't possible with every firm, but based off what your firm and organization allows, if you have leaders who are consistently saying to their teams, I want you to create space for what you need, and then they're also modeling that behavior and doing it. I know for me personally, one example I give and something I've done my entire career is I share my entire calendar. You can see when I'm going to the gym. You can see when I'm taking an acupuncture appointment. You can see when I'm going to the doctor, because I am showing that wellness and well-being is important to me, and I'm going to make it work with my day. And so it enables others to know, especially people that have reported to me, that they can do the same. That's one simple way I've seen folks do it. But again, if the organization doesn't enable and allow leaders to do that, their teams can then not do that. Another really simple one too is when leaders actually check in with their employees separate. This sounds very like, you're like, of course, Tamara, duh. But when I ask leaders, what are you doing to check in with your teams to ask them how they're actually doing or what they're doing to prioritize themselves? Many leaders are like, oh, I'm supposed to do that. We just talked about this client or this project. They forget that human piece of their teams as well. So ensure that in your meetings with your teams, whether individually or as a group, it's not just exclusively focused on business. It's not just exclusively focused on getting the work done, making the client happy, making money. It's also focused on them and how they're doing or what they need, checking in with them too, to make sure that they're feeling whole so that the whole team can win.
And if I could just add to that, because Tamara, I really like how you laid that out. And I see it on a more tactical day-to-day level by how not just managers and leaders, but everybody shows up. And whether or not you create an environment that de-escalates stress or escalates stress. And I coach my leaders. I'm a big quote person, so I quote Dr. King, be a thermostat, not a thermometer. Okay, be a thermostat, not a thermometer. Set the climate and tone in the room, not reacting to what's there. And again, this requires high-level emotional intelligence to be able to self-regulate and be aware of how you're showing up. Are you encouraging people to share ideas and contribute, or are they getting a fear and intimidation vibe that they're going to shut down and not contribute? This goes to giving feedback. Another quote I like, Teddy Roosevelt, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I could say, Tamara, I care about your career growth and skill development because I care. I need to give you this feedback. And I could be incredibly direct as opposed to saying, this was terrible. Don't ever give me something like this again. And again, when these leaders push back and say, oh, this soft, we're coddling. Now I got the KKR case study. So I'd love to see anybody accuse KKR of coddling and being soft. So it's all linked and threaded together of wellness, emotional intelligence, and creating healthy work environments for people to thrive.
And
I just want to add one last little piece, and I think as people might be thinking about this, Tamara, when you describe your schedule and how you do that, right? So here's the thing, and I know it works for you and it works for us because Tamara holds herself accountable for getting her work done. Tamara, you don't have to, it just goes into the whole remote thing, but we know that Tamara is going to prioritize and make sure that the client work that needs to be delivered is delivered. And she's going to work it to be able to do what she needs to do to take care of herself, and then what she needs to do as her role in the organization. And this is the sticky there. This is the part, like as Dave is talking, it's not soft. It's the way today's workplace works. And it's not easy to get there for sure, but it's something that we work hard at trying to encourage and model ourselves. And I'll tell you, I'm still working on it too. And Tamara's been an inspiration for me as thinking about how I take care of myself and sharing that to be able to set the tone for the team. As you said, as David said, be the thermostat. Thermostat, right?
One,
Be the thermometer. Okay. Right.
one last thing too, on like the cultural level too, it's also looking at what you as a leader and the organization is rewarding. Are you rewarding burnout because people are going way above and beyond and doing work that they don't need to be doing and is more than their plate, which is causing them to be burnt out? Or are you rewarding and recognizing people for taking care of themselves while also meeting the requirements of their role and keeping clients happy and doing exactly what they need to do for their job? So it comes down to like, what are you saying as a leader? How are you saying it? And what is the organization rewarding? If you're rewarding people, especially financially or with promotions or in different ways, with burnout, with effort, initiatives that lead to burnout, then people are going to see that burnout is more important than well-being.
Yeah, and that, just to that point, I'll be brief, Gordon. Tamara, there's a lot of recent research to show that money alone is not going to make anybody stay longer or increase their performance. And companies and firms, I think the reflex is to throw money at it and not do the hard work that is more sustainable. And to give an example of what you just described, I once did level setting interviews in an organization to see how people were experiencing this place at different levels of management. And I interviewed an individual contributor who was on a very high stress, high stakes project, working 14, 15 hours a day for 2-3 weeks at a time. And she said, at no time did anybody come to me and say, "How are you? Are you okay?" No sleep, going home at 2, 3 in the morning, coming back at 8 in the morning. Nobody said, "Are you okay?" And to your point, do you encourage burnout or do you encourage self-care?
And there's a question from a participant. I just want to make sure we answer that, Gordon, if it's okay. Sorry. And the question is, how can you train leaders to do that? I'm assuming it says, if leaders don't make wellness as part of their lives, how can we expect they care about their team's wellness? So that's where it comes down. When I say wellness is a strategic initiative or a strategic priority of the firm or organization, that's what I mean by that. So if your firm or organization is not making it a priority, then leaders will not care at the end of the day, because the firm, the highest level of the organization is not telling them that they need to. So they're going to continue. If they don't care about their wellness and well-being as a leader themselves, they of course aren't going to prioritize their teams if nobody is telling them they need to. So to me, that comes down to your organization or firm needs potentially some support if they do want wellness to become part of the strategy and the culture of your organization. If they don't want it to be that, then it's going to be team by team. And that's where you kind of have what I always call culture chaos. You don't have a consistent feel across the organization or firm.
And I just need to add one other thing, and I think it somewhat answers this question a little bit too. First of all, David, I'm very familiar with the research that money doesn't motivate, what have you, but I have met many people that money does motivate, right? And we know they're out there for sure. What I often find, and I don't want to say with just these folks, but that sometimes this grind that people go and do, and listen, I did a lot of this myself I so get it. The thing that I will say is I think, and you two just made me think about it. I will ask leaders if I don't want to say if you want to burn out, but if this continues, it's not sustainable, you're going to burn out. You will. And every single one goes, they stop. And burnout is not just burnout exhaustion, which it is, chronic exhaustion, but here you go. It will affect your health. And that's where people, and I will tell you one thing that I learned from my health scare recently. The doctors were very clear. If you weren't in good shape when you got sick, and it was cancer, when you got sick, you wouldn't be where you are today, having successfully gotten through it and battled it the way you did. And so I think, sometimes when we help people understand how important it is for them to stay healthy, because turbulence, winds, change, things do happen. And over time, they do happen. And if it happens to be an illness, we have to be in good shape to fight it.
And
And sometimes that will take somebody back when they realize that the way they are performing consistently, 14, 16, whatever, it will affect our health.
yeah, and that's a great point because in my answer to that question and in some of the leaders that I work with who fit this profile is they don't have the self-awareness of how their stress and burnout is impacting their teams until they get
Modeling
360
it and it's
feedback.
affecting. Yes.
And through giving them that summary report of how they're showing up, how they're impacting people, that in many cases is the light bulb that says, wow, I didn't know that. And part of the reason of this is physical. When you're under stress and threat, your amygdala gland starts pumping adrenaline and cortisol to get you in a survival. You are much more likely to make irrational decisions than rational decisions when you're in that state, as opposed to when you de-escalate the flow of cortisol, which is incredibly corrosive, keeps you up late at night, impacts your eating, impacts your mood. And this is all part of the interconnection of emotional intelligence to IQ.
It really is. And a lot of the disconnect sometimes is people might not realize, as you're saying, without feedback, that their ability to handle stress might be very different than somebody else's. And so they might not be able to understand, why is this person having an issue with this? So it's really about understanding more about your people and yourself and having that emotional intelligence to do that, because you can get results in a high stress environment. It's just not going to be sustainable over a long period of time or even a short period of time. And you are, the research shows, able to really get more production and efficiencies when people feel comfortable to bring their whole selves and that they're getting a lot of the information that we're sharing here. David, in the world full of urgency and reactive pressures, how can value-driven leadership or leaders keep a long-term lens without getting pulled into the daily drama or quick fixes?
Well, part of it is what I just said, staying in that calmer state. But what Natalie said earlier, those corporate values, those mission statements, those personal values, that's your North Star. Okay, that's the direction, and it should help you make decisions and solve problems going forward. Okay, so the values for me is part of the organizational culture of how the work gets done. So your management and strategy is the fact. It's what you do. You practice law, you provide accounting services, you do scientific research, whatever that is, that's what you do. Your values and your culture is how you do it. And your values may change over time given the priorities or circumstances that you're faced with. But I strongly caution leaders that if they are going to change their corporate values or act in contradiction to the stated values, you have to, you don't have to do anything. I encourage you to be transparent in how you communicate that to the workplace. I mean, we've seen examples in the world where some companies make decisions that align with values and others make decisions that seemingly contradict their values. What I don't encourage leaders to do is make a decision that is in contradiction to a stated value, but then go to the stakeholders of the company and say, this doesn't change anything. Well, it does. It certainly does to some of the people that work in the organization. And I think that, again, goes to whether or not it increases trust or diminishes trust. And it can impact retention and recruiting. So if you align and are strong to your values, then that makes decision-making much more simple than struggling over whether we should, whether we shouldn't. If you have undefined values or an undefined culture. But if if part of our values is we treat each other with civility, dignity, and respect, then if somebody's screaming and throwing things at somebody and slamming doors and you don't address it, that impacts everybody in that organization. So I'm a strong believer in aligning around values, but if you change them, I strongly encourage you to be incredibly transparent in the why and not just say, hey, we did this, but nothing changes.
Thank you for that. And just a quick update. I'm not sure if we mentioned it or not, but we are recording this, so that you will be getting a copy of the recording for everyone that is present today, and also for those who have registered. Let's close this out because we don't have that much time left. But if anyone has a question in the audience, please put it into the question and answer box. We will try and get to it. We have a few more that are just popping up. But to close out, what's one personal value that guides your leadership in times of change, and how do you keep it front and center? Why don't we start with Tamara?
I was gonna say, can you have me go last?
Why don't we start with David Sarnoff?
Oh, no, so since it's been a theme of mine, and I score well on it, is empathy. I couple empathy and optimism, because quite often, they go hand in hand, but optimism is a very high level emotional intelligence behavior that leaders can encourage and show their teams, even through adverse times, we're going to get through this. There's a way out. And they don't just cave and throw up their hands. To quote Martin Seligman, to paraphrase Martin Seligman, who is a pioneer in positive psychology, particularly in the legal profession, there's a high degree of pessimism among lawyers. And paraphrasing Seligman, he says, if you didn't have pessimism going in, law school will teach it to you. And he goes on to say how this permeates every aspect of the profession, but it's not set in stone because these are learned behaviors. And if you infuse more optimism and empathy into those practices, it becomes a much more endurable and lasting opportunity than if it's in a very fixed, narrow mindset where people are resisting change, they're resisting different practices and innovations, and that creates a tension. And we didn't really go into this a lot today, but certainly as we're seeing across generations and bridging generations, we're seeing significant increase in generational work from our clients than we did 2-3 years ago.
Thank you for that, David. Natalie.
Well, I don't think this will be any surprise to people, but due to my recent situation, if you ask me today, my number one value right now is health. How does that show up for me? I am very thoughtful around my schedule, more so than I've ever been. I'm more thoughtful about asking for help when I need it. And this is something one of my coaching clients once said to me today, and if she's on here, shout out to you, but I'm not saying who you are, but you may recognize yourself. I've been getting good at putting a fence around it. So setting boundaries better than I ever have before. I want to do my best work. I want to be a caring leader. I want to try and elevate my team. I want to try and model healthy emotional and physical behaviors so that they'd be comfortable doing the same. So that's how it shows up, and that would be number one for me, at the moment. And like I already shared the other values with you, they drive me. They drive my behavior.
Thank you, Natalie. And Tamara.
So it's not my top one, but it's definitely like my top 5 is authenticity. And the way I keep it front and center, especially when it comes to change, is, I stay true to myself through that. And I'm also honest with how I'm feeling and not afraid to express, fear or concern or worry or excitement, whatever the emotion may be, and having those conversations with my team about that. So for me, it's really about authenticity and staying true, again, not only to who I am, but sharing that with others to give them permission as well to be authentic.
Thank you for that, and really appreciate all the input from the panel today. For people that are listening, if you want to learn more about any of the services that we provide, if you're already a client of ours, please reach out to your client manager. If you're not, please pop an email. You have my email address in a lot of the communication, gordon@loebleadership.com, and we will get back to you very shortly. We are also going to raffle off. We're going to pick a random name for all the people that have registered and participated today. An assessment. And Tamara, can you tell us a little bit about that assessment, that the CSI assessment that they will be getting?
Yeah, it's the change style indicator. It's called the CSI-2. It's a newer change assessment, but it is scientifically valid and credible through multi-health systems. They're also who administer the EQI that David spoke about earlier. It shows how you respond to change and actually can give you good tools and techniques on how to better communicate on how you respond to change, adapt to change. It's also great for team workshops and team collaboration to better understand how your team may respond to change. So when you get that assessment, we're happy to debrief it with you and walk you through it and make sure that you understand it as well.
Yeah, and also please connect with us on LinkedIn.
Yes.
and Loeb Leadership. We post a lot of content. We react to other people's posts and questions. So would love to engage with you.
Definitely. And we will have a few things coming up as well, a few more webinars coming up and a few more events. So you will be getting notices about that. Natalie, did you have something?
No, I just want to say we like to engage.
Definitely. Well, it's about 3 minutes before the hour. We really appreciate everyone taking part in this and for staying through with us. We hope that you got some great information out of this and some takeaways. And again, feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional questions. Have a great rest of your day. And thanks again.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone.